It seems the Duchess of Sussex has once again managed to steal the spotlight at a charity event, though perhaps not for the philanthropic reasons she intended, as a rather revealing video of her own social circle laughing behind her back begins to circulate. I'm glad you've joined me as we begin to unpick the layers of this development. When one observes the traditional mechanisms of genuine philanthropy, particularly those modeled by the working members of the royal family, there is an inherent understanding that the cause must invariably eclipse the individual. Yet, as we witnessed during a recent charitable gathering, Meghan Markle appears entirely unable or unwilling to grasp this fundamental tenet of public service, opting instead to orchestrate an arrival that felt less like a show of support and rather more like an audition for a reality television program. While genuine philanthropists and established figures in the charitable sector made their quiet, dignified entrances, blending seamlessly into the atmosphere of purpose and quiet dedication, the Duchess elected to arrive in a manner that can only be described as a meticulously calculated spectacle. She arrived cloaked in a remarkably ostentatious outfit, featuring a voluminous garment that closely resembled a large comforter, ensuring that every eye in the vicinity was forcibly dragged in her direction. Accompanying this rather bizarre sartorial choice was a completely unnecessary and aggressively visible security entourage, a maneuver that inevitably disrupted the natural flow of the event and immediately signaled a desperate demand for preferential treatment. This immediate imposition of her presence effectively hijacked the narrative of the evening before it had even begun, transforming a noble gathering into an involuntary audience for her ongoing personal drama. One must wonder at the extraordinary lack of self-awareness required to believe that a charitable function, presumably organized to highlight those in genuine need, is the appropriate venue for a fashion show featuring an oversized, blanket-like coat. It is a fundamental misreading of the room that speaks volumes about her priorities, demonstrating a startling inability to gauge the mood and expectations of traditional philanthropic circles. To truly comprehend the mechanics of such an entrance, one must delve into the rather exhausting internal monologue that seemingly drives the Duchess's every public maneuver, a relentless and consuming need to remain the undisputed main character in any room she occupies. There is a profound psychological burden attached to this level of performative existence, an internal calculation that operates on the deeply flawed premise that arriving louder, larger, and with more manufactured chaos directly equates to possessing greater importance and societal value. For someone who so willingly discarded the historical weight and quiet, undeniable authority of the British monarchy, there appears to be a frantic, almost palpable panic to constantly validate her own relevance in a Hollywood ecosystem that is notoriously unforgiving and perpetually unimpressed. It is an existence defined by the constant, exhausting curation of self-image, where every interaction is weighed not by its genuine emotional resonance, but by its potential utility in the grand, ongoing narrative of Meghan Markle. This desperate clawing for the limelight betrays a fragile ego that equates subtlety with invisibility, forcing her to rely on theatrical arrivals and grandiose posturing to mask a creeping realization that her cultural currency may be depreciating far more rapidly than she and her advisors ever anticipated. Instead of finding security in her achievements or her acquired title, she seems trapped in a perpetual cycle of proving her worth through sheer volume, an exhausting endeavor that ultimately highlights her deep-seated insecurities rather than projecting the quiet confidence of a true leader. The irony, of course, is that true power never needs to announce its arrival. It simply is, radiating a natural gravity that draws people in organically rather than forcing their attention through sheer, unadulterated spectacle. By demanding the spotlight so aggressively, she inadvertently exposes the very emptiness she is attempting to conceal, projecting an image of a woman who is terrified of fading into the background of a society she once believed she would effortlessly conquer. Before we look closer at the true motives at play here, do ensure you are subscribed to the channel. As seasoned observers of this institution, we know the real story is rarely the one handed to the press. The surrounding atmosphere during this utterly overwhelming display was, as one might expect, thick with a polite but icy bewilderment from the actual dignitaries and generous donors who had gathered to focus on the cause at hand. One can clearly picture the stifled exasperation of the event organizers, individuals who dedicate their lives to raising awareness for serious issues, watching helplessly as the gravitational pull of the evening aggressively shifted from their noble charity to the sheer spectacle of a former working royal demanding the room's absolute subjugation. According to a well-placed source who observed the unfolding circus from a discreet vantage point, there was a palpable collective eye roll among the Hollywood elite and high society figures present, a silent but damning consensus that such overt displays of self-importance are not just gauche, but fundamentally amateurish. The stark contrast between the understated elegance of those who truly hold power and the chaotic, attention-seeking entry of the Duchess served only to highlight her inherent misunderstanding of how genuine influence operates within these elevated circles. In these rarefied environments, respect is commanded through quiet competence and unwavering focus on the philanthropic mission, not demanded through a parade of security personnel and wildly impractical scene-stealing attire that turns a solemn charitable endeavor into a mere backdrop for a personal photo opportunity. It is in these silent, observant moments that reputations are either solidified or irreparably dismantled, and it appears the room universally recognized this arrival not as an act of grace, but as a desperate plea for validation. The sheer mechanics of having security clear a path in an environment already populated by vetted, high-net-worth individuals borders on the absurd, treating fellow philanthropists as though they were a threat rather than peers. Such behavior does not project importance. It projects a profound, almost comical paranoia that alienates the very people who hold the keys to the societal gates she is so desperately trying to pry open. Before we dissect today's events, I strongly advise you to subscribe and turn on notifications. This is the surest way not to miss the unvarnished truth. Now let us turn our attention to the crux of this rather revealing scandal, the very footage that has set the internet alight with speculation and quiet amusement. In the video that has so rapidly circulated, we see the Duchess of Sussex with her back entirely turned to the camera, blissfully unaware of the silent yet entirely damning pantomime unfolding mere inches behind her. A woman positioned directly in her wake is seen casually checking her telephone before deliberately setting it down to exchange what can only be described as a profoundly knowing look with the individual filming the scene. What follows is a soft, unmistakable laugh, a shared moment of covert amusement that speaks volumes about the true dynamics at play within this supposedly elite gathering. The sheer audacity of this silent exchange is magnified by the complete absence of any inquiry. Not a single person in the vicinity felt compelled to ask the videographer what they were filming or why the lens was so intently focused on Meghan's back. It is as if an unspoken consensus had already been reached among the attendees, a silent agreement that the Duchess, rather than being a revered guest, had unwittingly transitioned into the evening's primary source of discreet entertainment. To truly understand the sting of such a public, albeit covert humiliation, one must consider the sheer arrogance required to assume absolute, unquestioning loyalty from a social circle constructed entirely on the shifting sands of utility rather than genuine affection. The Duchess appears to operate under the distinctly fragile illusion that her curated presence commands an automatic reverence, mistaking the transactional politeness of Hollywood for true, enduring friendship. This performative bravado, this desperate projection of untouchable status, serves merely as a highly polished veneer, attempting to mask a deep-seated, agonizing insecurity regarding her actual standing among the truly influential. She navigates these high society waters with the exhausting belief that she is the orchestrator of every interaction, utterly blind to the possibility that the very people she believes she is charming are, in fact, silently appraising her societal decline. It is a profound tragedy of her own making, believing that one can discard the historical, steadfast loyalty afforded to the royal family and easily replace it with the fickle, opportunistic alliances of the entertainment industry. The internal monologue must surely be a chaotic scramble to maintain the facade of absolute control, an exhausting endeavor that prevents her from realizing that the smiles directed at her face may very well transform into thinly veiled smirks the moment she turns her back. The atmosphere in that room, beneath the surface level of clinking glasses and charitable platitudes, was undoubtedly thick with the unspoken alliances and cutthroat realities of modern celebrity culture. In these fiercely competitive environments, the toxic and notoriously fragile nature of Hollywood friendships often dictates that mocking a visibly faltering figure becomes a rather crude, yet highly effective bonding exercise for those desperate to secure their own positions. According to a source within the inner circle, the quiet mockery happening just out of frame was palpable, an almost instinctual reaction from a crowd entirely weary of the ceaseless, demanding narrative that inevitably accompanies the Sussexes. This is not a society that protects its wounded. Rather, it is an ecosystem that silently observes the missteps of those who demand too much attention, waiting for the precise moment to collectively and quietly distance themselves. The shared look and the soft laugh captured on film are not isolated incidents of rudeness, but rather symptoms of a much broader systemic fatigue among her peers, a silent rebellion against the exhausting performance art that Meghan insists upon bringing to every gathering. In this unforgiving arena, a faux pas is rarely met with sympathetic correction. It is instead met with the quiet, devastating cruelty of an inside joke to which the victim remains entirely oblivious, signaling a brutal shift in the room's hierarchy. As we continue to dissect the footage that has so thoroughly captivated the public imagination, it is the smaller, almost microscopic details that provide the most damning insight into the Duchess's current state of mind and her rapidly deteriorating social standing. Beyond the glaring humiliation of the covert laughter exchanged behind her back, a forensic breakdown of the video reveals a fascinating, albeit deeply uncomfortable pattern of physical behavior. Meghan's incessant need to reach out, touch, hold wrists, and firmly grip the hands of those she engages in conversation. In polite society, particularly among the British aristocracy she briefly inhabited and ultimately rejected, physical touch is employed sparingly, reserved for moments of genuine intimacy rather than deployed as a blunt instrument of social navigation. Yet for the Duchess of Sussex, this hyper-tactile approach appears less like an expression of authentic warmth and more like a desperate, highly calculated maneuver to manufacture a sense of closeness that simply does not organically exist between her and the Hollywood elite. One can almost observe the visceral internal panic radiating from her as she reads the subtle cues of disinterest, realizing she is slowly but undeniably losing the attention of the room, which prompts her to physically tether her conversational partners to her side, lest their focus drift to more genuinely compelling figures. It is a deeply revealing physical manifestation of her plummeting social capital, an exhausting, transparent attempt to exert physical control over interactions that are rapidly slipping through her perfectly manicured fingers. This presumption of intimacy, this aggressive breaching of personal boundaries, operates on the profoundly flawed assumption that physical proximity can somehow miraculously compensate for a glaring lack of authentic connection or mutual respect. It is a tactic that ultimately betrays a woman clinging white-knuckled to the fading illusion of her own relevance, utilizing a forced embrace as a physical barricade against her own creeping irrelevance. When one's natural charm fails to captivate an audience, it seems the default strategy is to literally hold them hostage, a maneuver that only serves to highlight the vast chasm between the status she believes she commands and the reality of how she is actually received. The surrounding atmosphere, when subjected to this relentless barrage of performative warmth, is entirely palpable, even through the grainy, zoomed-in filter of a smartphone camera capturing the event from afar. Watch closely as the recipients of these forced physical affections invariably react. There is a distinct, almost involuntary physical stiffening, a subtle flinching that betrays their profound discomfort with such unearned, highly presumptive intimacy. The natural human instinct when faced with controlling, boundary-violating affection from a mere acquaintance is to politely but firmly pull away, and one can clearly see the wealthy attendees engaging in a delicate, complex dance of extricating their limbs from her grasp without causing an overt, headline-generating scene. This is not the relaxed, easy mingling of equals enjoying a charitable evening, but rather a tense social hostage situation disguised as a pleasant exchange where the victims are forced to smile politely while their personal space is aggressively commandeered by a woman desperate for a photographic moment. According to a source behind closed doors, these constant, inappropriate physical impositions have become a subject of intense, whispered grievance among her peers, who find the sheer audacity of her tactile dominance to be not only exhausting, but fundamentally disrespectful of established social boundaries. In an ecosystem where personal space is fiercely guarded and access is considered a highly valuable, heavily restricted commodity, her habit of treating fellow guests as physical props in her ongoing public relations campaign is viewed as the absolute height of social gaucherie. It transforms what should be sophisticated, breezy networking into a deeply uncomfortable exercise in endurance, leaving a trail of politely exasperated individuals who are simply waiting for the earliest socially acceptable opportunity to escape her suffocating orbit. The sheer awkwardness of watching influential figures actively attempt to subtly disengage their hands from her double-handed clutches speaks volumes about the lack of genuine respect she commands, painting a portrait of a woman who must physically force people to interact with her because her mere presence is no longer a sufficient draw. To fully grasp the magnitude of this subtle, yet devastating public humiliation, one must broaden the lens to examine the Duchess of Sussex's wider industry connections, particularly within the fiercely competitive realms of beauty, fashion, and media. There is a timeless, unforgiving adage in the entertainment industry that warns one to be exceedingly careful of the toes you step on while climbing the treacherous ladder of fame, for they are inevitably the very same toes you will be forced to kiss on your miserable way back down. Meghan appears to have entirely ignored this fundamental rule of Hollywood survival, operating instead under the profoundly misguided assumption that the transactional relationships she cultivated at the height of her royal notoriety would remain steadfast even as her cultural currency began to inevitably wane. We are now witnessing the agonizing, incredibly public fracturing of these highly conditional alliances, as the influential figures who once eagerly sought her endorsement are now quietly recalculating the immense tangible risks associated with her increasingly toxic brand. It is becoming painfully apparent that the carefully curated network of media executives, beauty moguls, and high society tastemakers she considered her permanent safety net was never built on a foundation of genuine mutual respect, but rather on a fleeting, opportunistic desire for proximity to the mystique of the British crown. As that royal shine continues to fade under a relentless barrage of public relations disasters and poorly received commercial ventures, these fair-weather friends are demonstrating a ruthless, self-preserving instinct by systematically severing their ties and looking the other way. The footage from the charity event is not merely an isolated incident of high society mean girls enjoying a private joke. It is a glaring public symptom of a much wider industry exodus, a visual confirmation that the powerful individuals she once considered her peers are now actively and rather brutally distancing themselves from the wreckage of her stalling reinvention. To witness a woman who so fiercely demanded to be recognized as an A-list titan now reduced to the butt of an unspoken joke among the very crowd she sought to lead is a testament to the incredibly fragile nature of a reputation built entirely on grievance and entitlement. Beneath the defiant, ever-present smile, the meticulously tailored designer ensembles, and the desperate physical grasping we analyzed earlier, one can only imagine the dawning, terrifying realization currently taking root within the Duchess's internal monologue as she watches her grand Hollywood rebranding aggressively stall. The sheer psychological toll of recognizing that the so-called friends she spent years carefully cultivating, the allies she believed would champion her post-royal endeavors, are now quietly, systematically jumping ship must be an isolating and profoundly destabilizing experience. For a woman who has so consistently relied on her ability to charm, manipulate, and seamlessly orchestrate her own public narrative, The sudden, jarring inability to control how she is perceived by her chosen peers represents a catastrophic failure of her primary survival mechanism. She traded the unconditional historical duty of the monarchy, a role that guaranteed lifelong relevance and respect, for the fickle, hyper-commercialized approval of the entertainment industry, operating under the deeply arrogant belief that she possessed the unique, unparalleled talent required to conquer both worlds simultaneously. Now, as the highly anticipated invitations to elite gatherings mysteriously cease, and the lucrative legacy-defining production deals fail to materialize, she is forced to confront the chilling reality that she is entirely expendable to the very people she sacrificed her royal standing to impress. The frantic, exhausting scramble to remain relevant in an ecosystem that actively and mercilessly discards those who fail to deliver a consistent return on investment must surely keep her awake at night, as she realizes that her meticulously planned ascent has unexpectedly transformed into a humiliating, highly publicized freefall. It is a harsh, unyielding awakening to the fact that loyalty in California is exclusively purchased with ongoing success, and when the success dries up, leaving behind nothing but a trail of broken promises and burnt bridges, the isolation that follows is both swift and brutally absolute. The internal panic must be deafening, a constant drumbeat of anxiety as she scrambles to find the next project, the next cause, or the next grievance that might temporarily arrest her inevitable slide into Hollywood obscurity. The surrounding atmosphere within the broader entertainment industry has undeniably shifted, and the tide that once lifted the Sussexes to unprecedented, albeit entirely unearned, heights is now aggressively pulling them under with a breathtaking ferocity. If one listens closely to the hushed, confidential conversations taking place in the executive suites of major streaming platforms and the boardrooms of luxury global brands, the whispers are no longer centered on the Duchess's untapped commercial potential, but rather on the undeniable fact that she has become a distinct, unmanageable liability. According to a well-placed source familiar with the current sentiment among Hollywood decision-makers, there is a profound, collective exhaustion regarding her constant, predictable need to center herself in every single narrative, a tiresome behavior that actively detracts from the charitable causes or creative projects she is supposedly attempting to champion. The initial feverish curiosity that surrounded her dramatic, unprecedented exit from the royal family has long since evaporated, replaced by a cynical, hard-nosed business assessment that reveals a glaring lack of authentic substance beneath the endless layers of self-promotion and manufactured grievance. Executives are increasingly wary of attaching their hard-earned professional reputations and substantial corporate financial resources to a figure whose every public move seems mathematically guaranteed to generate controversy, intense online mockery, and a fiercely divided public response that drives away key demographics. In a town that exclusively worships box office returns, high viewership numbers, and seamless public relations, her consistent, baffling inability to deliver a universally beloved product or maintain a dignified, unbothered public presence is viewed as the ultimate unforgivable sin. The industry's polite, smiling exterior now masks a cold, calculated exclusion, an unspoken but fiercely enforced consensus that the era of bending over backwards to accommodate the Sussexes' exorbitant, entirely unjustified demands has officially and permanently concluded. She is rapidly discovering that while Hollywood may initially embrace a royal rebel for the sheer spectacle of the scandal, it has absolutely no long-term use for a duchess who brings nothing to the table but demanding behavior and plummeting approval ratings. The long-term consequences of this spectacular, multi-year miscalculation point directly toward a legacy defined not by the groundbreaking humanitarianism or the billionaire media mogul status she so aggressively chased, but by an absolute suffocating isolation of her own meticulous design. By relentlessly pursuing the hollow, fleeting trappings of Hollywood stardom and prioritizing immediate financial gain over long-term institutional loyalty, she willfully threw away the quiet dignity, the immense global respect, and the unparalleled philanthropic platform naturally afforded to working members of the British monarchy. The stark, tragic reality she now faces, stripped of the royal protection she once viewed as a prison, is that her frantic pursuit of universal adoration has ultimately left her with the genuine respect of neither the ancient institution she so carelessly abandoned, nor the cutthroat entertainment industry she so desperately sought to conquer. She is trapped in a liminal space of her own creation, a former royal reduced to attending mid-tier galas, where the attendees snicker behind her back, forever chasing a level of influence that her own actions have permanently placed out of reach. In a world governed by the blinding spotlight and relentless, unforgiving scrutiny, not every smile is friendly, and not every glance is innocent, as the devastating footage from that charity event so perfectly and painfully illustrated for all the world to see. One cannot help but wonder if the Duchess is finally, quietly realizing that the Hollywood court, with its deeply transactional loyalties and silent, brutal excommunications, is far more ruthless than the royal one she once publicly complained was so utterly intolerable. Leave your thoughts below. I read every word you write. And if you value this unvarnished look at the monarchy, do ensure you are subscribed and share this with those who appreciate the truth.